Yeah, we're looking at these myths of spiritual practice. They're called myths because they're suggesting of something that's not literal, and something that's quite deep and that is not always conscious to us. But we're hoping by exploring these myths that we're bringing something that is maybe not so conscious in the way that we approach life and spiritual life and practice. Hoping that by doing that we can be a bit more aware of it. And there's these 4 myths. I'll say what they are briefly so we know roughly where we are. But I thought this evening I'm going to talk about transcendence, and I'll say a little bit about my life, because these myths lend, well, it's about life, isn't it? So they lend it. It's an invitation, I think, to just say a few things about my life, and hopefully through that you'll see what this is driving at. I haven't got any water left now because I just tipped it all over the floor. Good. So yeah, there are four myths, and the myth of transcendence is the myth of self-development at one level. So we're imagining that when we come across a Buddhist path, it's something that we can tread. It's one of the most common ways of talking about the path, a very common way, the Noble Eightfold Path. You develop yourself, you strive, and you work on your mind and your behaviour and your ethics and your understanding, and you cultivate the path. You do things, you make progress, and you use your effort, you use your intelligence, you use your all those qualities that you have to draw forth from yourself, and you're moving towards this ideal that you have in your mind of the Buddha. And then the Buddha is conceived of as being something outside ourselves, and the Buddha himself, in the life story of the Buddha, went through a series of changes, a series of movements, a series of practices. Thanks, Richard. Practices in order to become enlightened. So this is a common way of talking in the Buddhist path. And the next thing is surrender. So this is where we imagine, yes, the Buddha's outside of us. It's something that we have to move towards in time, but it's not so bound up with the idea of being on a path where we use a lot of effort, we use a lot of determination, striving will, but we open ourselves to the influences of this mysterious force, or what we would call the unconditioned mind, the Buddha mind, enlightened mind, the liberated mind, the mind which is beyond being bound up with the change of things, the changefulness of things. It's beyond that. It's a vision of that, and that we instead of sort of striving towards that, how we conceive ourselves is surrendering and opening up to that. And the third myth is the myth where our relation to the goal. For there's always a goal in spiritual practice. I mean, you couldn't imagine, there not being a goal in a sense. There's the gap, if you like, between enlightened mind and unenlightened mind. If there was no sense of a gap, there wouldn't be any path at all. We could just go home. That would be the job done. Or you are enlightened. That's the other possibility. But there is a gap nonetheless. But that's conceived more in an inner way. So the goal or this awakened state is within. It's our own deepest nature, and we can discover this within ourselves. And this again changes the tone of the way that we conceive what we're doing, and we'll be coming on to that. And the fourth one is again it's inner, but it says that even this is called emergence, where it's more of a sense that even striving towards a goal of something within us, even striving to overcome or see more clearly within ourselves, even that is a bit too much. What we really need to do is allow these qualities to manifest, and this is another path. And I think that all of these myths will be at play in a spiritual path, So they're not exclusive, but becoming aware of all of them becoming aware of our tendencies to maybe favour one mode more than the other can be very helpful, because at a certain point it might be that actually we really do need to cultivate in a different way. So I'm going to show you a bit about that in my life, and I'm going to talk about transcendence and discovery. I'll touch on that. So, good. I grew up in South London. I was born in South London, in Surrey, and I was born with one hand. I don't know whether you can see that in the screen. If I go like that, you probably can. So I was born with one hand, and there's nothing wrong with being born with one hand, because you don't notice it really. You just come into the world. It's not a big deal. It's a big deal for other people. It's a shock and a horrific thing for a parent. But I myself, I don't remember it being a big problem much, until, of course, I reached that age where I became more aware of it, and I became aware that it was a sort of a weakness. It was something that was a problem. And I was fairly mercilessly teased and bullied for a few years, thankfully not for my whole childhood. But that was a very difficult time, and I remember clearly one day, one specific moment, where I thought to myself, I can never change this. I cannot change this. I am never going to grow a hand. Yeah, and this is a really hard thing, and I think it's the essence of why bullying is such an awful thing to experience as a child, because you cannot. It's usually a characteristic of you is being pointed out, which you don't have any control over at all. You can't do anything about it, and you don't have the wherewithal to see that things change. So I remember that horrific moment of thinking, I can't get out of this, I'm stuck. And I mention that because it's very important that we have a sense that we can develop as a person. It's just absolutely crucial. And it's very damaging when that is thwarted completely. Happily, in the rest of my life, I was very lucky. I had a very good family, still do. And I was given lots of things and opportunities in life. I was a scout. I became a scout. And I was a good scout. I tried hard. I like British bulldogs. I don't know whether you're allowed to play that anymore, but you just used to run at things and run at people in a kind of crazy way to get across the line. And you have collect badges and become better at things, and eventually somebody gives you a promotion and you become a patrol leader and things. There's a path of being a scout, yeah. So this is obvious in a way, but when you go to the Scouts, you don't adopt a position like, well, you're already a scout, you're already absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with you at all, you already have scout nature. No, they don't tell you that. They say, learn how to use a compass, and learn how to read a map, get out there and bivouac or something like that, and get on. So there's growth. The other thing in my life was I think possibly, slightly looking back, a bit of a compensatory mechanism for my disability, although not entirely, but really trying to be very good academically, and luckily being quite successful academically, and in sport and things. And I decided I wanted to go to Oxford to study law, because that was where you go, and you get the kudos and the kind of all the things that go with that. And I was thinking for this talk about my life, how, where did that idea come from, the idea of being a lawyer? Where did it emerge in my mind? I don't think my parents told me. They didn't have a big agenda. Don't recollect any teacher telling me. And it just made me think that we have kind of a vision of ourselves in the future, don't we, all the time? We have a kind of an idea of ourselves. It's usually quite unformed. It certainly is in my case. I don't know. Maybe other people have a very clear picture of where they're going to be in the future. I never really have, but not a clear picture, but nonetheless a very distinct sort of thread that you sort of... When you're 7, you can't imagine being 18, but you can imagine being 9. 18's too far away, and you have this kind of inchoate, it's an incomplete sense of yourself, but it's strongly there, it's strongly there for all of us, a sense of where we're going in the future. And it might be that it's quite unconscious to us, and that we're not really aware of what that image, of where it came from, whether it was just the conditioning that we received, or whether, wherever it came from. But of course, when we're children, it's likely that it's arisen a lot from the conditions that we find ourselves in. But we have visions of ourselves. It's quite natural, and it's not to be dismissed. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just what humans are like, So this transfers also, this kind of attitude, or this possibility of developing ourselves, comes in when we take up spiritual practice. But I think it's importantly different, and I'm going to try and say a bit about that. I first went on retreat when I was studying law at university. I went on a course led by the Vipassana Trust. Many people go on these retreats. And I think I don't exactly know, my friend went on it, and that was the instant reason that I went on it. But I wasn't unhappy. I didn't experience myself as, very unhappy or depressed at that time. I did a bit later, but that's another story, so we'll get on to that. But I had this feeling of being a bit cut off from myself. I hadn't really yet... I'll go on and say, but so I went on this retreat, and the first instruction that I got when to meditate was just to sit, 4 a.m. in the morning, just sit and be aware of the sensations on my top lip. And if my mind wanders, if I notice that, just to bring it back to those sensations. And the amazing thing is that was the first time that anybody had given me a clear instruction about what to do with my mind, and I was very determined. I'd signed up, I had given up part of my summer holidays, and here I was. It was a new thing, it was wonderful, fascinating. And just for 10 days, that was pretty much all I did. You move around the body, observing different sensations, and they can become extremely strong. At some points I just thought I must have spiders crawling across my face, and I'd sort of go like this to brush them off, and pain, bliss, just things changing. It was really boring, even though we did 10 hours of it a day, just hour after hour. It was very. I think what it did for me was to bring on a sense that I could change my mind, and that I could have I wasn't going to be blown around by every stray thought that went through my mind. In a way, it was introducing the difference between thoughts and awareness. You can be aware of thoughts, you can be aware of body sensations, and they come and go, and you have some agency, you have some ability to do that. And that was really a revelation, and it made me much more happy. It made me able to approach situations where I would have felt nervous or insecure, and just sort of regard the sensations that were coming up in my body, just noticing tension in the body, noticing dryness in the throat, or noticing thoughts saying, she doesn't like you, or whatever it is, going through my mind. And the way they described this on this retreat was a model of karma and purification. So they said your body is like a kind of repository of all your deeds, and your habits are somehow embodied in your bodily experience. And by noticing them, and by noticing the patterns of your mind, you're purifying your karma. You're not reacting. You're not just going along the same old ruts that you go down. It was a very simple, beautiful exploration of the Buddhist path. There was a guy just in front of me who spent a lot of the retreat being annoyed because I had a little bit of a cold. But he'd been on 5 retreats, I learned, and I thought, wow, 5 retreats, he must be... what would it be like if you did 5 retreats like this? 10 days. Wow. So there was a sense of a path. I then went to America and the United States, and I travelled across the United States, and I was really into meditation. This was after university, and every time I met someone, I'd say, and I heard just a hint they might be Buddhist, I was right on them, and we had a good old chat, sitting there smoking cigarettes and talking about Jack Kerouac, and not really doing any meditation, but just really having a good time talking about Buddhism and things. And I remember there was a moment, when I was in San Francisco, and I was I was in the downtown, was probably in the, the Chinatown area, and it was a full moon festival, and I stood by a stall watching an old man paint. He really was an old man. He was probably in his 70s or 80s. He was finger painting, and I watched him for a while, and he asked me how old I was, and I said I was 21. And he just said, such a long way to go, such a long way to go, like this. And smiling, it was a lovely thing to say. And I remember thinking about that and thinking how wonderful that there's a long way to go. I don't know what he meant, but what it meant to me was that life is a much bigger journey than I had previously thought it was. Life is there's a story that's much deeper and more interesting than the one that I was on paper, which was to do with going to Oxford and doing a law degree and becoming a lawyer. And that story for me had kind of run out of steam at that point, because I thought, I don't want to be a lawyer. I just imagined myself ahead being a lawyer, and got to the end of that story, and I wasn't very interested in the whole book. I just sort of forget it. But this deeper story was kind of, as I say, it wasn't that I could picture it in my mind. It just touched a chord at that deeper level. Oh wow, maybe there's something more. And of course, I was reading Dharma bums and other things like that, which was wonderful. So there was, even at that stage, I didn't think I was a Buddhist, but I had a kind of faith in this possibility of change and the kind of endlessness of the path, and the vision of that was exciting to me, and it was real. Yeah. I came back to London, and time passed, and I was living near the London Buddhist Centre, and I went past the London Buddhist Centre in East London, in Bethnal Green, and I saw it. I just saw it. I didn't see it online, or it wasn't online. It was just 1997. Didn't even have mobile phones, and I saw it, and I thought, there's a place. I'll go there. And I came and I learned meditation, and I think Yanavach was there. He was there, and Maitreya Bandhu was there, and Subhadramati was here as well. And I found myself on another retreat in a school in Oxfordshire, a girls' school. The girls weren't there. And there I had this experience, and I won't talk too much about the experience, but I was just doing a metta bhavana practice, again, quite dutifully, like going through the stages. The great thing about when you start practices, you don't have any other conception of it, and you just do what you're told. And you use your intelligence to do what you're told, and people can make huge strides very quickly because they're fresh to that. And so I was doing the metta bhavana when I felt this energy coming up in my body, and I thought, whoa, what's this? And then I just thought, well, just let it be. It's not going to hurt you, And all of a sudden, I felt this. Well, it's like moving into, surround sound. That's the way I thought of it. It's like this surround sound love, really, just love. It was very still, very peaceful. It was completely let go. It was fine. There was nothing at all wrong with that experience. It was an experience where there was all of the problems of myself and comparing myself and thinking about things and sort of worries that I carried around. It all just completely gone, and that was a big shock to me. It was a revelation that was possible. It felt very grounded as well. It didn't feel, and yet it also felt so extraordinary that you just I couldn't imagine. There was no precedent for that within my life. So, of course, I thought, well, these Buddhists really know what they're talking about. And Maitreya Bandhu, then he was doing these wonderful talks, as he does, and he was setting it in this context of the Buddhist path. So then how I understood that experience was very much informed by all these views about the path and the possibilities of, well, that was one state, but then there's another one beyond that, and there's another one beyond that. And you can develop, you can grow. And furthermore, this is a whole community which grows. This has this kind of social reality. You're not doing it in your head. We're doing it together. We're doing it with other people. There's a Sangha. And this Sangha embodies so much, so many people, all pouring their inspiration into it, and there's institutions, and then there's a path. You become more involved, and you become a mitra, as we call it. or an order member. So that was my experience of just this great relief of finding a path. It was not something that was in my background that I would have thought that I would find. It wasn't on the same level as anything that I'd been told by anyone growing up. It was a different order of things. I have that in a way was the key moment, that retreat. And in a way the whole of my life has been an unfolding from that time forward. There's just been so much motivated by that experience. And that never stops. So when we talk about this myth of self-development and self-transcendence, we have a vision of it, but the vision grows and the vision changes. It doesn't it's not like you have one vision and then that's it, and then you kind of move towards it and then you get there, or you stop. The vision of what it is that is being unfolded is expanding and growing all the time as we grow. And I don't think that can ever, I don't envisage a point where I'll stop that. I hope not, because it's exciting. I like the idea that there's more. Because if there is just this, if there is just me, well, it's okay at times, and frankly at other times it's not okay at all. But if that's it, well, that's disappointing in some ways. We all have our moments, don't we, where we have these wonderful visions, but they just go, or that's my experience. They just they peter out a bit, and you have to keep practicing, and you keep growing. And so I think when we have this kind of experience of developing the self or transcending the self, there's a vision of a better self. There's a vision of a better self comes in. So when we grow up, we're given ideas about who we might become, and they can be okay. They can be reasonable sort of aims that we have for our lives growing up, having a family and attaining a bit of independence and wealth and status, and all those things are not bad things. They're very good things. They can be, but this path is a vision of a much deeper and more deeper sense of self. So, and there's all of our energies are included. There's a sense of transforming absolutely everything, and it's endless. Going with this sense of transcendence, there's a sense of a hierarchy, and the way that I understood, and the way it was told to me, probably by Maitreya Bandhu or Jnana Vajra, was that and by, I think this came from Bhante Sangharakshita, the man who founded this order, was that the spiritual life is the flowering of natural life. It is natural life. It's not. Previously, I might have thought of being religious or spiritual as a very narrow sort of subset of human experience that was, frankly, a bit bonkers. But anyway, it was very narrow and dogmatic, and you had to believe things that were patently absurd. And I thought that was what spirituality or religion was, but no, this was the flowering of natural life, and it has within it a natural sense of growth and hierarchy. And of course there are people, who embody that at greater levels, and one perceives that, or one at least has an experience of that. Then there's we dedicate ourselves, so we dedicate our efforts, and as a young man, and as I am now, I do need something to do. I do need something to dedicate myself to, be that serving in some way or other, and the friendship that comes with it. And in a way, I think I just fell in love with the whole thing. I fell in love with the friendship. I remember one of the magical moments. I was living in Sheffield at one stage, and we did the T-Ratna Vandana, which is the salutation to the three jewels, before an evening class, and I could hear the Sheffield Wednesday football ground roaring this goal coming up from the hill below, and we were chanting the T-Ratna Vandana, and it was just completely magical. I don't know, somehow the roar of the crowd, it was just completely magical to be practicing something with others on a path. Yeah. So I guess I fell in love with it, and it was an expression of something ineffable. So I never really I don't know why, but I never really fell into the trap of thinking the only way that all this ineffable life can be expressed is through a small Buddhist movement. I never fell into that trap thinking that. But nonetheless, without that small Buddhist movement, I could never have made anything of. Well, it wouldn't have even occurred to me, I think. So that's we can say a lot about institutions, and they get a bad press, don't they? They sometimes do anyway. Or we know governments and corporations, churches, and things, and sometimes they deserve that. But in a way, there's like a building. A building can be you have a building and you live in it, and sometimes it's a really fit for purpose, and sometimes it's really dangerous. Most of the time, it needs a bit of care and attention. It is not perfect, but you need this structure within which to then start, unfolding your spiritual practice, or I don't even like that term, but unfolding the meaning of this path. And then also within that, you also are allowed to explore other ways of that aren't so based around maybe striving and will. And we're going to come on to surrender next week. But I think that's the doorway then to finding other ways of practicing, or other ways of conceiving that are not perhaps so based around the structure of things and the way that we practice. So that's what I'll say about development. I want to just talk about the downsides a little bit of that, and then I'll move on to another way of practicing. But this beauty of the ideal grows, is what I said. As I said, it grows, and our feeling for it's real and genuine. Yeah. But there are strong habits. We have strong habits, don't we? I think I had this idea that because when I got to my 5th retreat or my 10th retreat, or I would probably be getting through certain things, certain habits. But my experience was that even if I had a good retreat, or I joined the community, I lived upstairs, practiced, and I had an enjoyable time, and I made sort of discoveries. But my experience, and I know for many people, is that you run into yourself at another level. You hit the wall in some way. And I don't think Jnanavacha would demur from me, despite his very warm introduction, in saying that sometimes some of my negative traits were directed at him. And I guess there was for me there was a conflict. There was this early ideal of myself wanting to be a lawyer, wanting to sort of have money and, do good things as a lawyer and be good and get the rewards of being good and all of that. That was still there. That was still there in some shape or form. And then there was this, as Jnanavacha said, I felt a bit annoyed about this because I was being introduced to this other ideal of self-development, which seemed to be beyond that. And yet I couldn't envisage it to myself. It started to feel a bit like I'd question it. I would become doubtful. My other habit was also comparing myself, saying I'm not as good as Jnanavacha. And then I thought secretly, he's not as good as me, which is often how it goes. Or they're sort of pretending, and then it's like, oh no, they've got all the ideals. They're really doing it. I'm not. I'm not. And one of the dangers with this myth of self-development is that you can just sort of go into your faults more and more, and there's a lot of them. And it gets complex, doesn't it? Life is complex, and our conditioning is complex, and it's not the clear route that we thought it was going to be. And we use the tools that we have, but we use the mind that we have to try to sort of solve our own problems. And sometimes that very mind is not the appropriate mind to be solving the problems that we have. I remember, I would be conflicted, and then I would be angry, and then I would be using my intelligence in a way which was more biting or just not very pleasant to be around. Conflict, falling into a conflict, don't know what to do. And then doubt. I mean, I think I had self-doubt. I just doubted myself. I didn't feel confident. Part of that, I think, was I felt like I'd stopped having a particular life. I'd become quite successful as a law student from a prestigious university. I'd stopped that, and I felt sort of deficient in a way because I hadn't followed through on that. And yet, as you point out, I also felt caught by this ideal, and it's not a comfortable place to be. It became increasingly uncomfortable. So that's where I got to, and luckily at some point somebody did. I mean, I left it. I lived at the Buddhist Center for 6 years, and I left with this feeling of being defeated. Actually, I couldn't do it. I couldn't use my will. Nobody would ordain me. I'd asked to be ordained, and they wouldn't do it. And then I got sick of it, and I thought, all right then. It was a very difficult time, very painful to have an ideal and to have a sense of a path, and then to feel not up to it. Of course, we have to. That's quite a common experience, and there's nothing wrong with that experience in a way. And perhaps if we're lucky, if we keep going, if we hold true to something at some level, then another way of practicing emerges. And it might be that it's just somebody taps us on the shoulder and says, at some point, just at the right moment, and they say, well, maybe you could just sort of, I don't know, just relax a bit, or something, or many people started to practice around this time. In fact, exactly around this time that I was experiencing this, a lot of people started to feel that they too had to practice with a bit too much will, a bit too much. It had become a bit dry and a bit strain, and it wasn't yielding the earlier fruit that it had before. And then you start thinking, what's the point? But then there's people who've been through all this, and I think they started to teach people another way of practice, which was much more to do with sort of relaxing into your true nature, or taking heart, taking confidence. I've never been particularly able to, and I'm going to come on to this a bit, to surrender. I've not really found that mode of practice very easy. But the idea of discovering what was, so it's sort of this, our true nature already is with these qualities. Where else can they be? We have to find them within ourselves. And we can relax a bit more. And we can maybe even stop thinking in terms of hindrances to awareness. In meditation, we often talk about overcoming hindrances. But in this other type of practice that we were doing, which was more in line with self-discovery, which is what we'll be coming on to in a few weeks, you're really letting go of all that in a way. You're not so concerned with hindrances and becoming very concentrated. And I won't say too much about that, but it can be a big relief that there are people around you who have been through all that, and you didn't notice it before, but they practice in quite a different way to you. And you thought that there was just one way to practice, but then you realise people have been doing this all along, and that can lead you to dismiss your earlier self, and you think of yourself as a striving, the striving fanatics, striving for enlightenment, and I won't talk too much about that, but there's all sorts of sort of controversies and discussions that go on about these things. So. I want to say a few things before I wrap up about where this really gets me. I think that the fruit of my practice, what I've been doing for 25 years, is that I really know some of the limitations of the culture that I live in and that I embody. And I've really got to a more real sense of what the issue is in my life. And I'm going to try to say a few things about that. Because even if we're dealing with discovery, even if we changed our tack, my habits were still there. Death is still there. The deeper issues are still there, whatever way one approaches things. So when the Buddha set out on his quest, he set out on the quest to end old age, sickness, and death. So this is not a small quest. This is not a trivial pursuit. This is not something, not just about making you a little bit better at various things or smoothing your experience. This is an unfathomable and enormous undertaking. And what I started to do to realise was that the culture that I had been brought up in was incredibly materialistic. And I don't mean that in the sense of just sort of buying things and adorning yourself with stuff, although it is that too. I mean, it's a sense of the body is, all. And what we see around us and what we perceive through our senses is a real readout of reality. And we're like mini scientists in the world. We were sort of dangling down in the world somehow. We have a self, we don't know what it is, no one knows what consciousness is, maybe it doesn't even exist. But we're just observing things, and our schooling and everything is geared towards the kind of knowledge which says you can remove human experience from the data. The data is what tells you what's real, ultimately. And you can remove love, imagination, perception, everything. You can remove all of that, and that's how you arrive at truth. And we've been doing this for so long. It's grabbed all the headlines, it's taken over from the church, and that is how you understand what's really real, what's really true. And then we say it's an atom, or it's a quark, or whatever, or it's this or that. But we give it names, and we think that is there by the truth. When I was young, when I was 18, my grandfather died. And my grandfather was involved in Buddhism, and in many ways he was probably the person whose first sparked a little bit of an interest. I was more interested in him than in Buddhism because he was quite an eccentric man. When I was 18, he died, and he wanted to be put on a table in his study, in the coffin, open coffin. He had this really old study with all his books on Eastern religion, philosophy, haikus, Heidegger, Hegel, Nietzsche, all around the room in these wonderful bookcases. And then on his desk, he was an optician, and he had all his optical stuff, and on his desk was him in his body in a coffin. And I remember going in there to look at his body, and I'd heard him talk about philosophical matters. He was a philosopher, really. And I just thought, where's all that gone? What is the point of all of that study that he did? It didn't even seem to make him happy in his life. But now it was pointless, and I felt a bit embarrassed, actually. I felt ashamed to think that in front of my grandfather's dead body, that it was a waste of time. But it just seemed de facto. You couldn't deny it. It's a dead body, so of course, where's consciousness gone? It can't be anymore. And I had no way in my culture of telling me any story other than that was a final wall, and the best thing was not to think about it, really. The best, because there wasn't any purpose in thinking about it, because it was obvious already what the answer was. And anybody who told you anything else was just cuckoo, And you could say that about the Buddha. The Buddha died too, didn't he? And so, in a way, I kind of met that limit in my own understanding. The Buddha died, so hang on. What good was it? What good was it if he died? So you're forced when you to think beyond that. There must be some other way of conceiving things beyond that, of course, and experiencing beyond that. But I really did doubt that, actually, and I think it's okay to admit that it's likely that one will have a bit of doubt about that. We have glimpses, don't we? When I was 16, I had this moment when I was just lying on my bed, just sort of idly in the afternoon, and I saw out my window and I saw a plane, and the plane went behind a tree. And when the plane emerged from a tree, I had this experience of completely non-separation between the plane, the tree, the window pane, and me. There was and all the people in the plane. I just felt it all immediately, and it was a shocking moment that was totally out of the blue. I had no idea what it was. And we can have glimpses like that. We probably have glimpses of something, all of us, but we can ignore them. And with death, even though I had no intuition as respect to my grandfather's death, I've certainly had intuitions and kind of experiences around the death of others. That time when you become more sensitized and you start to speak in a different way, and people start to speak in a different way, and there's we can squash that down as soon as it's over and explain it away. I think it's very hard to surrender materialism, really, because it's like we've, as a culture, the way that I was brought up was that we've arrived now at how people of all times would have experienced the world had they not been completely deluded. Had they just been able to drop all their superstitions and their, but really, is the way that, say, a tribal person in South America experiences the universe, it's going to be so fundamentally different. And do they know more or less than somebody just a bit further up the continent in Manhattan? Well, clearly, scientific knowledge has introduced an extraordinary depth of understanding. There's no way that you can deny that. But something about the way that we participate and the way that we understand things at a more fundamental level has led to an intense sense of separation, fear, and a kind of meaning void, a kind of, what you could call it, nihilism. And we think we know. I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I've kind of given that up now, actually. I don't think that I know. And my journey, underlying whether I've been thinking about making a lot of effort or making no effort and progressing in that way, my journey in a way has been a journey towards an openness to the fact that I don't know, and that is to me, that if I can make some progress on that level in this life, where I really start to understand and involve faith, imagination, intuition, mystery, if I can open up to those things, which are big, scary things to open up to, I found, like having a kind of a rational mind that's quite strong and that I lean on quite a lot, that I value myself and I think other people value me in that way, but opening to those qualities and realizing that those qualities are not really things that I can pin down. They're not really within my grasp, ultimately. There's something that's beyond my grasp. And that going back to an understanding which is more essential about ourselves, which is more attuned to nature in its deepest sense. So that is what interests me. That is what excites me at this time, to find ways to do that. And I think it's a challenge. So I think what we need with self-transcendence is to have an even vaster, greater sense of self-transcendence, and to never stop imagining that there's a path and that there's a journey. and with self-discovering ourselves to go deeper into that, and not to imagine that we've arrived at how things are when we look within ourselves. Not to imagine for a second that we've really got to the bottom of that one. And just to have a bit of humility really about all of that. And, to realise that it's a far bigger enterprise than... It almost seems silly sometimes when I hear... Well, whenever I notice myself thinking about kind of how much progress I've made, or... It just seems silly. The whole thing is much, much bigger than that, and you don't need to think about it very hard to know that the universe and what life is a total mystery, and we don't know anything about it at that level. So, transcendence more profound, discovery more deep, more surprising, and next week we're going to be talking about surrender. We just need to find, and this is a way to look up, to really find a way beyond this materialistic view, that there's just this one life. We don't know what consciousness is. It might not even be a thing, and anyway, it's just gone. And that we know objectively what's going on, and this is it. This is it already. And one way that I do that is just to look up. One suggestion: if you're ever in any doubt about, just look up at the night sky. You've all had that experience, and you look up at the night sky, and immediately you're taken to the edge of your imagination, and then you can go a bit further, but you realise this is not something that you can know. And even in a materialistic description of evolution as we have it now, the Big Bang and the explosion of the particles and the formation of galaxies and things, that is unbelievable. It is completely beyond being able to bring it into any kind of imagination. When you add into that consciousness, and when you add into that the mystery of consciousness emerging within matter or from matter or above matter or whatever, or there being no difference between mind and matter, when you start to add in mind, it's really unfathomable then, and you realise that even the scientific description of the universe and its unfolding is not literally factually true. You can't stand outside the universe and sort of watch it develop like that. We're in the universe, and time and space and everything are unfolding. I'm really going to stop before I go too far with that. But I wanted to end with a little quote from a book which I love, and it just reminds me. It's behind me now because it was soaked. It's called The Universe Story by Brian Swim and Thomas Berry. And it may not be to everybody's taste in the way that they write, but what they were trying to do was to try to bring the universe alive and to tell the story of scientific materialism, imbue that with life, and by doing that tell a much more complete picture. And I'll just end with this. 15 billion years ago, in a great flash, the universe flared forth into being. In each drop of existence, a primordial energy blazed in an intensity never to be equalled again. Thick with its power, the universe billowed out in every direction so that the elementary particles could stabilize, enabling the first atomic beings of hydrogen and helium to emerge. After 1 million turbulent years, the frenzied particles calmed themselves enough for the primeval fireball to dissolve into a great scattering, with all the atoms soaring away from each other into the dark cosmic skies opening up in the beginning time.
Good. Well, thank you very, very much, Satyadasa. What a beautiful talk. So intimate and honest and generous, and then culminating in this vastness, an unfathomable vastness that includes everything and is always beyond us. Really, really wonderful. I could just listen to Satyadasa all evening. Beautiful, beautiful talk. And you could see, well, I could see anyway, how truth isn't an abstract thing. In science, in physics, it might be an abstract thing. In Buddhism, in life actually, it's always an intimate, personal affair. And Satyadasa very generously shared something of himself and his quest for truth, and in that I think showed something of the universal truths about the Dharma and about being human and questing for something that transcends ordinary humanity. So thank you very, very much, Satyadasa. A real pleasure and privilege to listen to. So in a moment we're going to have a cup of tea or a 5-minute break. You can get a cup of tea if that's what you want. I want to just make a plea for your money, really. One of the things Satyadasa said was, he talked about this community as a social reality, that the Dharma is not just something that happens in one's mind. We're trying to form a community that will carry on beyond any of our lifetimes, for lifetimes and lifetimes to come. Who knows, we might be, well, one day I might be born back into this community. I could do a lot worse if I was. And in order to do that, in order to preserve a sense of lineage, and after all, Buddhism has continued for 2,500 years because of communities, sanghas, not just solitary practitioners, but whole movements of practitioners in a lineage. It's continued like that. In order to continue like that, you need worldly things. You do need buildings, you need institutions, you need YouTube channels and cameras and lights and tech and people willing to give up their time and so forth. And the London Buddhist Centre very, very much needs that. I believe that, listening to Satyadasa tonight, I think that we've got something extremely important to offer the world. We're tiny, even though we're part of a larger international movement, Triratna, that's tiny, really, really tiny, and it's very, very young. And if you can help us grow, if you can help us expand our reach, give to that. I think it's a noble cause to give to. For myself, I think it's the most noble cause to give to. That's why I want to serve the Dharma. And I just urge you to give, because we do need the money. We're so reliant on donations, on dana. We're fortunate that, the teachers here, Satyadasa, myself included, we don't get paid. So in a way the LBC can survive, perhaps more than other institutions might be able to, because it's so much reliant on people being generous. But we really need, therefore, your generosity in response. And we want to, as much as possible, not charge as much as possible. I mean, sometimes for retreats and things, I know we do have to charge for residential retreats. But in this time of this pandemic, we've been trying to just offer the Dharma as freely as we can. And actually, we have been very generous. You've been very generous. And I want to urge you to carry on being generous. If you can give as much as you can. It won't be wasted. So Britt has just put a link up. And I just want to thank you in advance for considering that.